The studio lights burned hot, casting a golden glow over the Jimmy Kimmel live set, where the audience buzzed with anticipation. Johnny Depp, dressed in a tailored black suit with a loose silk scarf draped around his neck, lounged in the guest chair, his signature fedora tilted low over one eye. His fingers, adorned with silver rings, tapped a restless rhythm on the armrest. Jimmy Kimmel, crisp in a navy suit, leaned forward, his smile sharp but practiced, the kind that could pivot from charm to challenge in a heartbeat. The crowd's energy was electric, sensing something raw beneath the polished surface of late-night banter. Depp had been out of the public eye for months, dodging headlines and whispers about his personal life, and tonight marked his first major appearance since those courtroom battles that had split opinions across the globe. Kimmel, never one to shy away from a rating spike, had promised his producers he'd dig deep, but even he didn't expect the fire that was about to ignite. The interview started smooth enough. Kimmel lobbed softballs about Depp's latest project, a gritty indie film about a washed-up musician chasing redemption in New Orleans. Depp's voice, low and gravelly, wove stories about late-night jam sessions with local blues legends, his eyes lighting up as he described the city's haunted charm. The audience ate it up, laughing at his offbeat humor, like when he claimed a ghost had tuned his guitar in a Bourbon Street bar. But Kimmel, sensing the crowd's warmth, decided to pivot. He leaned back, his grin tightening, and asked, "So, Johnny, you've been through a lot lately, haven't you? How do you handle the noise, all those people picking apart your life?" The question landed like a pebble in still water, ripples spreading fast. Depp's fingers froze mid-tap, his jaw tightening beneath a faint smirk. The audience held its breath, sensing the shift. Depp tilted his head, his eyes narrowing as he studied Kimmel. "Noise," he said, his tone deceptively light. "You mean the vultures circling, trying to sell their papers?" The crowd chuckled nervously, but Kimmel didn't flinch. He pressed on, his voice smooth but pointed. "Well, some say you've been your own worst enemy, stirring the pot with those legal fights. Fair to say you've made some bold moves." The word bold hung in the air, laced with just enough edge to sting. Depp's smirk faded, replaced by a hard glint in his eyes. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Bold's one way to put it, Jimmy. Another's standing up when the world's trying to knock you down." The audience erupted in cheers, but there was an undercurrent of unease. Kimmel's smile didn't waver, but his fingers gripped his cue cards a little tighter. The tension simmered as Kimmel steered back to safer ground, asking about Depp's music career, his band's upcoming tour. Depp answered, but his words were clipped, his gaze never leaving Kimmel's face. It was like watching two fencers circling, each waiting for the other to lunge. Then Kimmel, perhaps emboldened by the crowd's energy, took a risk. "You've got this outlaw image, Johnny, the rebel who doesn't play by the rules. But some folks wonder if that's just a mask. What's the real Johnny Depp like, behind the scarves and the swagger?" The question was a blade, slicing through the veneer of celebrity charm. Depp's face darkened, his fingers curling into a fist. He leaned back, crossing his arms, his voice cold as steel. "You want real, Jimmy. Reals. What happens when you stop reading tabloids and start listening to the man in front of you?" The audience gasped, a few clapping, others murmuring. Kimmel's laugh was forced, his eyes flicking to the control booth. The commercial break couldn't come soon. Enough. As the stage manager signaled the cut, Depp stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. He didn't look at Kimmel, didn't acknowledge the crowd's confused applause. His boots echoed as he strode toward the wings, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. Kimmel, recovering, cracked a joke about needing a stronger coffee, but his voice betrayed a flicker of unease. Backstage, Depp's team swarmed him, their voices low and urgent, but he brushed them off, his eyes fixed on some distant point, as if the storm inside him was only just beginning. Backstage, the air was thick with tension, the hum of the studio crowd muffled behind the heavy curtains. Johnny Depp stood near a cluttered equipment rack, his fedora now pushed back, revealing eyes that burned with a mix of anger and defiance. His team hovered, a manager in a crisp blazer, whispering urgently about damage control, while a young assistant clutched a water bottle, unsure whether to offer it. Depp ignored them, pacing like a caged animal, his boots scuffing the worn floor. He muttered something under his breath, too low for anyone to catch. But the way his hands flexed suggested he was wrestling with whether to return to the set or walk out for good. The stage manager, a wiry guy with a headset, glanced nervously at his watch, signaling that the commercial break was nearly over. Depp's gaze flicked to the glowing exit sign, then back to the curtain, as if weighing his options in a split second. Meanwhile, on the set, Jimmy Kimmel was regrouping. He leaned toward his producer, stationed just off camera, his voice low but sharp. "What the hell was that? You said he'd be game for tough questions." The producer, a woman with a tight bun and a clipboard, shrugged, her eyes darting too. The monitors replaying the moment Depp's face had hardened. "He's Johnny Depp, Jimmy. Unpredictable's his brand." Kimmel forced a chuckle, but his jaw was set, his mind racing to salvage the segment. The audience, still buzzing from the abrupt cut to commercial, whispered theories about what had set Depp off. Some thought it was Kimmel's jab about the legal battles, others the dig at his rebel persona. A few diehard fans in the front row exchanged knowing looks, convinced Depp was just being his authentic, untamed self. Backstage, the manager finally got through to Depp, placing a hand on his arm, a risky move given the actor's visible agitation. "Johnny, you go back out there, you control the narrative. Walk away now, they'll spin it like you're running." Depp stopped pacing, his eyes narrowing as he processed the words. He wasn't one to care about headlines, not anymore, but the idea of letting Kimmel's questions define the night stung deeper than he'd admit. He adjusted his scarf, a deliberate gesture, like armor being tightened, and gave a curt nod. "Fine, let's finish this." The stage manager exhaled, radioing the control booth to prep for Depp's return. The assistant, still holding the water bottle, scurried after him as he moved toward the curtain, his stride purposeful but heavy with unresolved fire. The studio lights flared back on, and the audience erupted as Depp reappeared. His expression unreadable but his presence commanding. Kimmel, caught off guard by the swift return, flashed a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Well folks, he's back. Johnny Depp, everybody." The crowd roared, some standing, their cheers a mix of relief and anticipation. Depp settled into the chair, his posture looser now, but his gaze locked on Kimmel like a hawk sizing up its prey. Kimmel, ever the professional, leaned in, his tone lighter but cautious. "All right, Johnny, let's keep this train on the tracks. Tell us about this tour, man. You're hitting the road with some serious talent." Depp's lips twitched, not quite a smile, as he leaned forward. "Yeah, Jimmy, it's real music, real people. No masks, no games, just the kind of truth you don't find in a studio like this." The jab was subtle but sharp, and Kimmel's laugh was a beat too late. The audience caught it, their murmurs rippling through the room. Kimmel pivoted, asking about Depp's bandmates, hoping to steer into neutral territory. Depp answered, his voice steady but laced with an edge, describing late-night rehearsals and the raw energy of live shows. But the air between them crackled, every word a potential spark. Kimmel, sensing the need to regain control, decided to double down. His next question, carefully worded but loaded. "You talk about truth, Johnny, but fans want to know, how do you stay grounded when the world's always trying to pull you apart?" Depp's eyes darkened, his fingers tapping that restless rhythm again, and the audience leaned in, sensing the storm wasn't over yet. Johnny Depp's fingers froze mid-tap, his eyes boring into Jimmy Kimmel with an intensity that seemed to strip away the studio's gloss. The question about staying grounded, though cloaked in empathy, felt like another trap, a chance for Kimmel to nudge the conversation back toward the personal controversies Depp had been dodging. The audience, perched on the edge of their seats, sensed the weight of the moment, their earlier cheers now a low hum of anticipation. Depp leaned back, his posture deceptively relaxed, but the set of his jaw betrayed a man holding back a torrent. Kimmel, sensing the pause stretching too long, tilted his head, his smile encouraging but edged with impatience, as if daring Depp to answer or crack. "Grounded," Depp finally said, his voice low, almost a growl, each word deliberate. "You stay grounded by remembering who's in your corner, not who's shouting loudest from the cheap seats." The audience erupted, clapping and whistling, some nodding as if he'd spoken a universal truth. Kimmel chuckled, but his eyes flicked to the control booth, a subtle signal he was navigating uncharted waters. He leaned forward, undeterred, his tone shifting to one of mock curiosity. "That's poetic, Johnny, but come on, you've got to admit, the spotlight's a tough place to keep it real. Ever feel like it's you against the world?" The question was a velvet glove over a steel fist, inviting vulnerability while hinting at Depp's embattled public image. The crowd quieted, waiting for the response. Depp's lips curled into a wry smile, but his eyes stayed cold, against the world. "Nah, Jimmy, just against folks who think they know you better than you know yourself." The jab landed, and the audience roared, some shouting encouragement, others gasping at the directness. Kimmel's grin tightened, his fingers drumming on the desk, a rare tell of discomfort. He pivoted, trying to lighten the mood. "All right, fair enough. Let's talk about something easier. Your style, man, the scarves, the rings, it's iconic. Where's that come from?" The crowd laughed, relieved at the shift, but Depp wasn't. Biting, he tilted his head, studying Kimmel like a puzzle he was tired of solving. "Style's just what happens when you stop caring what people think," he said, his voice flat but pointed. "Maybe you should try it sometime." The audience gasped, then cheered, the sound swelling like a wave. Kimmel's laugh was sharp, more reflex than amusement, and he raised his hands in mock surrender. "Ouch, Johnny, you're killing me here." But the glint in his eyes said he wasn't done pushing. He leaned in, his voice dropping "You know, people love this side of you, the guy who doesn't back down. But some say it's gotten you in trouble. Burning bridges. Any regrets about how you've played the game?" The question was a landmine, dressed up as a compliment, and the audience hushed, sensing the stakes rising. Depp's smile vanished, his face a mask of controlled fury. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his voice low and dangerous. Regrets. Only that I didn't call out the snakes sooner. The studio went silent, the air heavy with the weight of his words. Kimmel froze, his cue cards forgotten, his usual quick wit failing him. The audience, torn between shock and awe, murmured among themselves. Some whispering about Depp's past battles, others wondering if he'd just aimed that barb at Kimmel himself. The host recovered, forcing a smile, but his voice betrayed a crack. Well folks, that's why we love Johnny Depp. Never a dull moment. He signaled for another commercial break, the lights dimming as the crowd's applause felt more like a release than celebration. Depp didn't move, his gaze still locked on Kimmel, who avoided his eyes, busying himself with his notes. Backstage, the producer was already on her phone, fielding calls from network execs, while Depp's team braced for the fallout. As the stage manager counted down to the next segment, Depp stood, his movements slow, deliberate, like a man deciding whether to walk away or fight. He glanced at the audience, then back at Kimmel, his expression unreadable but charged with a storm that hadn't yet broken. Johnny Depp lingered at the edge of his chair, his posture rigid, as if every muscle was coiled for a decision yet to be made. The studio lights flickered back on, signaling the end of the commercial break, but the air felt heavier, the audience's applause more hesitant, like they were bracing for an explosion. Jimmy Kimmel, his composure regained, flashed a practiced grin, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of wariness as he glanced at Depp. The host adjusted his tie, a small gesture to steady himself, and leaned forward, his voice bright but cautious. Welcome back, folks. We're here with Johnny Depp, who's keeping us on our toes tonight. The crowd laughed, some clapping, but the energy was uneven, split between excitement and unease. Depp's expression didn't shift, his eyes still locked on Kimmel, a silent challenge hanging between them. Kimmel, sensing the need to diffuse the tension, steered toward a lighter topic. All right, Johnny, let's talk about something fun. You've worked with some legends, Tim Burton, Scorsese, the list goes on. Who's been the biggest influence on you as an artist? It was a safe question, designed to flatter, to pull Depp back into the rhythm of a standard interview. For a moment, it seemed to work. Depp leaned back, his fingers loosening their grip on the armrest. Tim's a visionary, he said, his voice softening, though the edge remained. He sees the world through a cracked lens, same as me. Makes you feel less alone when you're building something nobody else gets. The audience nodded, some murmuring approval, drawn in by the glimpse of vulnerability. Kimmel seized the moment, his smile widening. That's beautiful, man. So, what's next for you and Burton? Another gothic masterpiece. Depp's lips twitched, almost a smile, but his eyes stayed guarded. Maybe. We don't plan, we just feel it out. The answer was vague, almost dismissive, and Kimmel's grin faltered. He wasn't used to guests dodging the spotlight, and Depp's restraint was throwing him off. The host shifted gears, his tone sharpening just enough to notice. You're a hard guy to pin down, Johnny. Fans love that mystery, but they're always hungry for more. Ever think about opening up, letting people in on what makes you tick? The question was a baited hook, wrapped in flattery but fishing for something raw, something the tabloids could feast on. The audience leaned in, their murmurs quieting, sensing the conversation teetering on a knife's edge. Depp's face hardened, his fingers resuming their restless tap. What makes me tick? He repeated, his voice low, deliberate, like he was turning the question over in his mind. People don't want the truth, Jimmy. They want a story they can sell. The crowd gasped, a few clapping, others whispering, the room crackling with tension. Kimmel's laugh was quick, but it didn't land, his eyes darting to the producer offstage. Come on, Johnny, we're just having a chat here, he said, his tone light but strained. You're a storyteller, yourself, right? Give us something. It was a push, a challenge, and Depp's eyes narrowed, his body shifting forward, like a predator sizing up its mark. You want a story, he said, his voice cutting through the studio's hum. Here's one. Man tries to live his life, but folks like you keep twisting the knife. The audience erupted, a mix of cheers and shocked murmurs, some standing, others clutching their seats. Kimmel's smile froze, his hands splaying on the desk as if to anchor himself. Whoa, Johnny, I'm just asking the questions people want answered, he said, his voice tight, deflecting with a practiced charm that felt hollow. Depp didn't blink, his gaze unyielding. Maybe ask yourself why you need to poke the bear to get your clicks. The words were a gut punch, delivered with a calm that made them hit harder. The crowd roared, some chanting Depp's name, others stunned into silence. Kimmel, visibly rattled, signaled for another break, his laugh barely masking the strain. All right, folks, we'll be right back. As the lights dimmed, Depp stood again, his movements slow, deliberate, his eyes never leaving Kimmel, who busied himself with his notes, avoiding the storm brewing just feet away. The studio lights stayed dim, the commercial break a fragile pause in the storm that had overtaken the set. Johnny Depp stood motionless, his silhouette sharp against the backdrop of the Jimmy Kimmel Live logo. His eyes still fixed on the host, who was now hunched over his desk, scribbling on cue cards as if they could shield him from the tension. The audience, caught in a strange limbo, whispered among themselves, their voices a low buzz of excitement and disbelief. Some craned their necks, trying to catch a glimpse of Depp through the shadows, while others debated whether he'd walk off for good this time. Backstage, the producer was pacing, her phone pressed to her ear, fielding urgent questions from network higher-ups who'd caught wind of the segment's unraveling. Depp's team, clustered near the wings, exchanged hushed words, their faces tight with worry, but also a flicker of pride at his refusal to play the game. Kimmel, sensing the cameras would soon roll, straightened up, his smile returning but brittle, like glass about to crack. He glanced at Depp, who hadn't moved, his stance a quiet defiance that seemed to fill the room. The stage manager's countdown echoed through the studio, and the lights flared back on, the audience's applause erupting, though it carried a nervous edge. Kimmel leaned into his mic, his voice bright but strained. "We're back with Johnny Depp, folks, and let me tell you, this is one for the books." The crowd laughed, some cheering, but their eyes stayed on Depp, who slowly sank back into his chair, his movements deliberate, like a man choosing his battlefield. Kimmel, trying to reclaim the narrative, flashed a grin. "All right, Johnny, let's cool things down. Tell us about your fans. Man, they're out there chanting your name. What do they mean to you?" Depp's gaze softened for the first time, his eyes flicking to the audience, where a few held up signs scrawled with his name, others waving with fierce loyalty. "They're the heartbeat," he said, his voice low but warm, carrying a sincerity that cut through the studio's artificial sheen. "They see through the noise, always have. They're why I keep going." The crowd roared, some standing, their cheers washing over him like a tide. Kimmel nodded, seizing the moment to pivot. "That's powerful, Johnny. So, what do you say to them, the ones who've stuck by you through everything?" It was a softball, a chance to rebuild the bridge, but Depp's eyes hardened again, sensing the underlying agenda. "I say thank you," he said, his tone steady but sharp. "And I say don't believe everything you hear, especially when it's coming from a desk like yours." The audience gasped, then erupted, the sound a chaotic mix of cheers and shocked laughter. Kimmel's smile flickered, his fingers tightening on his pen as he leaned back, trying to laugh it off. "Man, you don't let up, do you?" he said, his voice light but with a bite. "I'm just trying to give the people what they want." Depp leaned forward, his scarf slipping slightly, revealing a glimpse of the tattoos beneath. "They don't want this, Jimmy," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper, but it carried like a gunshot. "They want real, not your circus." The crowd went wild, some chanting his name, others stunned into silence, the studio vibrating with raw energy. Kimmel's laugh was hollow, his eyes darting to the control booth, where the producer was signaling to wrap it up. Desperate to salvage the segment, Kimmel tried one last pivot. "All right, Johnny, let's end on a high note. What's next for you? Another film, more music? What's the plan?" Depp tilted his head, his expression unreadable, as if weighing whether to give Kimmel an inch. "Next is whatever feels right," he said, his voice calm but final. "Not what sells tickets or makes headlines. You should try that sometime, living for yourself." The audience roared again, the sound deafening, but Depp's face stayed still, his eyes locked on Kimmel, who was visibly struggling to keep his composure. The host forced a chuckle, raising his hands. "Well, folks, that's Johnny Depp. We'll be right back." As the lights dimmed for another break, Depp stood, his movements sharp, final, his boots echoing as he turned toward the wings, leaving Kimmel staring after him, the crowd's cheers fading into a tense, uncertain hum. Johnny Depp's boots struck the floor with a finality that echoed through the studio, each step toward the wings, a declaration of his refusal to play by the rules. The audience, still reeling from the charged exchange, erupted into a chaotic blend of cheers and murmurs, some standing to applaud, others frozen, unsure whether to celebrate or brace for what came next. Jimmy Kimmel remained at his desk, his smile a fragile mask as he shuffled his cue cards, his eyes avoiding the spot where Depp had just been. The commercial break lights dimmed the set, but the tension lingered, thick and unshakable, like smoke after a fire. Backstage, the producer was in full crisis mode, her voice sharp as she barked orders into her headset, while Depp's team formed a protective circle around him, their faces a mix of concern and quiet triumph. The stage manager, caught in the crossfire, glanced nervously between the set and the wings, unsure how to bridge the gap. Depp paused just beyond the curtain, his fedora casting a shadow across his face, his breathing steady but deep, like a man who'd just walked through a battlefield. His manager, stepping close, spoke low. "Johnny, you want to go back out, finish the segment, or we calling it?" Depp's eyes flicked to the glowing exit sign, then back to the stage, where Kimmel's voice was faintly audible, cracking a joke to the audience about needing a vacation. A faint smirk crossed Depp's lips, but it was laced with disdain. "I'm done," he said, his voice quiet but firm, the words carrying the weight of a man who'd drawn his line. The manager nodded, signaling the team to move, and they began, ushering Depp toward the back exit, where a car waited to whisk him away from the chaos. On the set, Kimmel was fighting to regain control. The cameras rolled again, the audience's applause, weaker now, tinged with confusion. "Well, folks," Kimmel said, his grin strained, "Johnny Depp's gotta run. But what a night, right?" The crowd laughed, some clapping, but the energy felt forced. The absence of Depp a void that Kimmel's charm couldn't fill. He pivoted to his next segment, a light-hearted bit about viral pet videos, but his voice lacked its usual spark, his eyes darting off stage, as if expecting Depp to reappear. The producer, watching from the booth, shook her head, already drafting an email to spin the night's disaster into a ratings win. The audience, sensing the show, moving on, settled back, but their whispers continued, dissecting every word, every glance, already crafting the story they'd share online. Outside, Depp slid into the back seat of a black SUV, the door closing, with a soft thud that cut off the distant hum of the studio. His assistant handed him a bottle of water, which he ignored, his gaze fixed out the window as the city lights blurred past. His fingers, still adorned with those silver rings, tapped a slow rhythm on his knee, a habit that betrayed the storm still churning inside. "Where to?" the driver asked, glancing in the rearview mirror. Depp didn't answer right away, his mind elsewhere, replaying the night, the questions, the crowd's roar. Finally, he spoke, his voice low, almost lost in the engine's hum. "Anywhere but here." Back in the studio, the show wrapped Kimmel's final monologue landing flat as the audience filed out, their phones already lighting up with posts about the clash. The crew began breaking down the set, their chatter filled with awe and disbelief, some calling it the boldest moment they'd seen, others wondering if Depp had burned a bridge too far. Kimmel lingered at his desk, his tie loosened, staring. At the empty guest chair, his producer approached, her voice cautious. "You okay, Jimmy? That was ... intense." Kimmel forced a laugh, but his eyes were distant. "Yeah, intense. Guess we got our headline." But as he stood, gathering his notes, his hand lingered on the desk, a flicker of doubt crossing his face, as if wondering if he'd pushed too hard, or if Depp's words had cut deeper than he'd let on. The studio lights went dark, the set, now silent, but the echo of Depp's departure hung in the air, a story that would outlive the night, already spreading like wildfire beyond the stage.